Okay, sorry about that. My mom came to the door. I have to open the door for my mama. So we're talking about challenges that are facing the Bush administration. Of course, the fallout from Katrina was really huge. And another issue with that was that FEMA, the Federal Emergency Department, the man who was running that was not the most competent person in the world. And so a lot of the stuff that the federal government had as emergency equipment to get people set up away from disaster areas, like trailers, for instance. They found empty lots, or they rented empty lots and put the trailers up, but they didn't hook them up to anything, which made them unlivable. You have to, if you're going to be putting people into an emergency shelter, they have to have running water. They have to have electricity. You have to have all of that. And FEMA did not do that. And so that man actually got fired as a result, even after, at first, he seemed to be doing a good job. And the president praised him on national TV. You're doing a good job, Brownie, because his name was Brown. And then it turned out that that guy was actually not very competent at all. And that really hurt Bush's standing in the American people's eyes. So another challenge facing the Bush administration involved an appointment of new justices to the Supreme Court. We started with John G. Roberts, who was nominated to take the place of Sandra Day O'Connor, but became Chief Justice because William Rehnquist passed away. I believe O'Connor retired. I don't think she died. I think she just retired. Once a justice is hired to become a justice of the Supreme Court, they're chosen by the president, and then they have to go through a type of interview with the Senate. Once they're on the Supreme Court, they are in the Supreme Court until they choose to retire or they die. They can stay on the Supreme Court until the very end. I mean, they can be very ill. They could be, stepped away from the Supreme Court, but they're still considered Supreme Court justices, and no one can take their place until they either retire on their own or they pass on. Let's see. I'm going to go back on here, and there we go. Samuel Alito was nominated to take O'Connor's place. Instead, he was the focus of a fierce battle between liberals and conservatives. Senators John Kerry and Ted Kennedy staged a filibuster to postpone his confirmation, but he was confirmed in late January. A filibuster is basically when a senator can get up and talk and talk and talk and talk and never shut up, because when they shut up, that means that they can cast a vote. So what they'll do is they'll talk for a very long time, hoping that most people will get tired of listening to them and walk away. And then when the majority of people who would be voting for the justice or the law that they're trying to pass, while people are out of the room, then they'll take the vote when those people are gone, and then they'll get it passed. Or, it's really sneaky and it's kind of gross. Okay. Although Bush remained committed to helping Iraq build a democratic republic, democratic meaning everybody's voice is heard, republic means people hire representatives. The acts of insurgents, these are people who came in from outside of the country to fight against the Iraqi people who were really pushing for freedom, and the United States soldiers who were there to help them. It caused many Americans to criticize the administration for its management of the conflict. Even though this is not the United States' fault, it was the fault of the insurgents. One of the things that the insurgents did not want is they did not want peace in Iraq. They did not want a stable government in Iraq, and they did not want Iraq to be rebuilt after the Iraq War. The reason for that is because they wanted to go in and create their own powerful place in government. Okay, in January of 2005, however, the Iraqis held their very first free election in 50 years. It had only been 50 years since they had had a free election, which tells you something. Before that 50 years, they had a semblance of freedom, and that was taken away from them. Now they were reclaiming it. The purple ink on the finger, it was a way to identify who had already voted so that they could keep voter fraud at a minimum. Voter fraud is when people are counted as voting, as having voted, when they maybe have voted multiple times, or maybe somebody has voted in their name. We have a huge problem with voter fraud in the United States because people don't take the names of the dead off the voter rolls, and people will find those dead people and register them to their political party and then vote in their place. And that's not okay. And that's something that really needs to be fixed. We need voter registration changes. Okay, so many conservative groups also began to question Bush's leadership because of the area of border security. This is why it was so important. It was under Bush's presidency that we were attacked during 9/11. But we discovered that the men who flew those planes into the buildings all had United States driver's license. Now, they had come to the United States legally to become students, and students specifically in the areas of learning how to fly. They took flight classes, and all of them had state driver's license, most of them from Virginia, who didn't have a law against people who weren't citizens getting driver's licenses. So they had identification, they had visas, so they were here legally. And we were already attacked from that, from something that we should have already caught that. But people were saying, what are we doing about the issue where we don't know the people who are coming in? Because we had a huge problem on our southern border. There were hundreds and hundreds of miles where the border was not at all guarded or protected. Same way on the northern border between us and Canada. There were hundreds of miles that were not guarded or protected. And so the questions began to be asked, are we as secure as we could be? One of the things would be, okay, so we have, because these guys use box cutters when they threatened the crews on the airplanes and they got into the cockpit and flew into buildings and killed thousands of people. The TSA was created and they made sure that people didn't have anything that was considered sharp. They make sure that people don't have a lot of liquids so people can't make a chemical bomb while on the plane. They have all these kind of crazy rules, but the people in the United States were saying, what about the most basic border security, like making sure we have our border guarded? Wouldn't that make sense? And so that became one of the big issues. And he was really pushing for, okay, yeah, we need to have our border guarded. But because the conservative groups were really after him for this, saying we don't really trust your leadership in this area, you need to ramp it up a little bit. Turns out that, well, the enemy of our enemy is our friend. A lot of people on the Democratic side were also pushing for a fence to be built between the United States and Mexico, specifically, trying to get after Bush. They were kind of jumping on the bandwagon. Oh, the conservatives are really upset with Bush because he doesn't have strong border security. We need to get on that bandwagon too and push for that strong border security as well. They flip-flopped on that later, though. Okay, now there were some positive aspects to Bush's presidency because he got pounded on in the press. I mean, the media just destroyed him every chance they got. So when people talk about what's going on with Trump right now and they're acting like this has never happened before, I often wonder about our national amnesia. It's like we don't remember at all how the press has treated previous presidents. And always before, everybody's been so respectful of the president. No, they haven't. No, they have not. They pounded on George W. Bush. They were so rude to him and they went after him. But yet he did have some really good points to his presidency as well. Like he restored the might of the military might that his father had actually cut. Okay. He strengthened some aspects of Homeland Defense. He didn't get all the way there, but he did strengthen some aspects. And he gave American families very generous tax cuts, which the people in the opposite party of him looked at as being horrible. How dare you give people in the United States their own money back, that they've paid too much in taxes and you're giving them money back. We need that money to give to other people. How dare they? So throughout most of Bush's time in office, the Republican Party was in control of Congress. But after his reelection, his popularity declined drastically. And a lot of that was because of all the different things that happened during his presidency, with the Iraq War becoming unpopular because of the insurgents, because of Katrina, and then these community leaders saying, well, it's because the federal government actually destroyed the levees. No, they didn't destroy the levees, but somebody was at fault, and probably multiple people were at fault with the fact that the levees were not as stable as they should have been. Okay, they weren't dynamited. They were just old and not maintained well, not by the local government, not by the state government, not by the federal government, and that should have been taken care of. This gave the Democrats an opportunity to criticize many of Bush's policies, and the press was there for that. They basically, every time somebody from the Democratic Party talked smack about the Republican president, the press reported it, and they reported it in the worst possible light for the president. They've been doing this for a very long time. And so as a result, there's going to be a big shift in the midterm elections. Midterm means when the president has already served for 2 years of his term and he has 2 more years to go. There are elections every 2 years for Congress, for the both the Senate and the House. Okay, now the Senate, senator can rule, not rule, that's a bad terminology for that. The Senate, a senator can serve for 6 years. That's their term. But for a person who is a representative, they only get 2 years. So every 2 years, there's new votes for people in the House of Representatives. When it comes to the Senate, the senators aren't both elected the same year. They flip-flop because they don't want to have an inexperienced senator, 2 inexperienced senators there at the same time. So in the 2006 midterm congressional elections, the Democrats secured a majority of both the houses and of Congress, both the Senate and the House of Representatives. The House and the Senate are both part of one branch of government called the legislative branch. We unfortunately hired a representative 2 years ago. Well, we didn't. New York State did. They hired a representative who did not know that basic fact, that she thought that the 3 branches of government were the Senate, the House, and the President. That is not how that works. The Senate and the House of Representatives are all one branch of government. They're called the legislative branch. Legislative meaning lawmakers. Then there's the executive branch that's run by the president and his whole group of people that he hires. All the secretaries of different departments, his cabinet, everybody who works for the president directly is part of the executive branch. And the executive's job is to make sure that the laws are implemented. Okay. And then there's the judicial branch. Their whole job is to make sure that all the laws are following the Constitution, because the Constitution is the law of the land. So for the first time in a long time, we had Democrats taking both houses of Congress, the Senate and the House of Representatives. Nancy Pelosi from California senator, became the very first woman Speaker of the House. Yay. And because it didn't take her long before she really kind of pushed her own agenda about what she wanted to do in her position of power. And she is still the Speaker of the House in our House of Representatives, but she is a rough person sometimes to admire. But let's go back to her very beginning in this. So she became the first Speaker of the House in, let's go back, 2006. It is now 2020. So that means for 14 years, this has been her job. Right around there. I think there was a little bit of break in there. But she has been in office as a representative for much longer than that, probably twice as long. So she has been in politics for a very, very long time, probably the vast majority of her life. She doesn't really have any kind of business background at all. But she is determined that she wants the federal government and the state governments to basically run the entire country, to keep business people out of that running and to keep you as an individual from making your own decisions. So both Congress and the Supreme Court challenged the president on the status of prisoners of war being held at the American military base at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. According to our Constitution, everyone has the right to a speedy and fair trial. However, if that person has been arrested as a result of war because they are an enemy, they are under military law where they can actually be held indefinitely without a trial. So that became the big question. Now, one of the things that President Obama wanted to do is he wanted to completely close this camp. It's called Camp X-Ray in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. He wanted to close it and then move all of the prisoners to prisons in the United States. Everybody kind of pushed back on him on that and said, let's not do that, because the whole point for him wanting to do that was when those prisoners made it to American soil in the United States and they were put in private prisons or federal prisons, they would then be under constitutional law, which would compel them to have a fair and speedy trial. With Camp X-Ray, because they are in a military establishment, because Guantanamo Bay, Cuba is a military base, they can keep them there indefinitely until all of the investigations are done. And some people are very frustrated by the fact that there is a prisoner base on, prison on Guantanamo Bay, but they have released multiple people in the past. In fact, Obama was responsible for releasing several people. All of the people he released went straight back to terrorist organizations. Not a single one of them just walked off and said, okay, I'm going to go live my life. No, they went straight back to their enemies. Okay, it's called Camp X-Ray because the majority of it is outside. Okay, there are small rooms that are cells, and then originally they were tents. This is on the Marine section of the base, so that's who's guarding them. Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, though, is a gorgeous, gorgeous base. It's really nice. It's like a tropical desert. It's kind of cool. So really pretty place. Okay, in 2008 election, Hillary Clinton, who was the former First Lady and Senator from New York, she became the first woman to be a leading contender in one of the major parties for president. She was a Democrat, and the Democrat Party was looking at her to become possibly the next president. So she was going for what we call the primaries. In the primaries, people say, hi, I'm a Democrat. This is my background. These are my qualifications. I want to be the Democrat Party's candidate for the presidency. So there's going to be several people who are going to raise their hand and say that. And there's going to be people on the Republican side who are going to raise their hand and say, we want to be the Republican choice for president because Bush's term is up. So Hillary Clinton's going to be one of the first to do this. And this has been really, people started looking at this as like, this has probably been on her agenda for a long time. While she was while she was the first lady, not vice president, she was never vice president. While she was first lady, she spoke very openly about how she would be co-running the country with her husband, and that had to be shut down because she had no legal basis for that claim. She was given really important jobs within her husband's administration that normally would go to people who aren't related to the president. She also became a senator of New York, purposefully as a stepping stone to this moment. So she was one of the people who was up for presidential election. But the Democratic Party also had their eye on this man. It was Hillary Clinton's biggest challenger, Barack Obama, who was, he had practiced law in Illinois. He told people he was a law professor. He was not. He actually gave a couple of speeches on campuses about constitutional law. He said he was a constitutional law professor, and people thought, oh, well, this guy's going to know the Constitution inside and out. He did not actually have that background at all. But he was what they called a community organizer. That was his big political gig. But after he was a political organizer, he became a senator for Illinois. So he was a senator. He did have the political chops and the ability to run for president. But he ended up clinching the Democratic nomination instead of Hillary Clinton, which really, really, really made her angry. She went after him. She was the first to say, well, we need to investigate his background because I don't think he's an American citizen. According to all of his school papers that we actually have access to, he is listed on those papers as being foreign born, that he was possibly born in Kenya. That's actually where his father's from. His father was black and from Kenya. His mother was white and she lived in Hawaii. People said, well, maybe he's not an American citizen, but he said, yes, I have it on my birth certificate. I was born in Hawaii. That makes him an American citizen because Hawaii is a state. But Hillary Clinton was the first one to say, no, we need to double check his background. And they called that the birther movement, because after Hillary Clinton started that, she said that, one of the Republican nominees for president said, we want to see his whole birth certificates. We want the long form birth certificate. Where exactly was he born? We want that. And that person's name was Donald Trump. Well, today, history has been rewritten by the press to say that Donald Trump started the birther movement. It wasn't started by him. It was actually started by Hillary Clinton. He just picked it up. The Republicans, there were a lot of people who were running at that time, and one of those people was Donald Trump, but he had to bow out pretty early on. And a man named John McCain, who was an Arizona senator, he was the one that the Republican Party chose instead. The Republican Party messed up with this nomination. I'll be really honest with you. The primary reason was because John McCain was very, very liberal in his policies, and the majority of Republicans were not as liberal as he was. He was actually much more to the Democratic style of thought than he was to the Republican. He was a big fan of social programs and things like that. But he was a former Vietnam veteran, which most people can get behind when it comes to choosing a nominee. They like somebody who's had military experience, because that means that they will understand when they are in the Oval Office what military action needs to be taken, if any does need to be taken. And he was also a prisoner of war, which made him very sympathetic to people. For the first time, 2 sitting senators were going to compete for the presidency. So you had John McCain versus Barack Obama. Now, because of John McCain's very liberal outlook, the Republican Party had to find a vice presidential candidate who was very, very conservative. And so they chose this woman. Her name is Sarah Palin. She was chosen specifically because she was very opposite of John McCain. When these two began to share the ticket and they began to talk to the American people, the press went after her, not John McCain. They went after her. They went after her looks. They went after her speech patterns. They made fun of her jokes when she got up and spoke. People in the United States thought she actually was stupid, because there was an SNL or Saturday Night Live skit about her where Tina Fey played her, and Tina Fey looks a lot like her. And she made some statements, and people thought that what Tina Fey was saying was actually what Sarah Palin said, and that wasn't true at all. Sarah Palin was asked, how do you see yourself working with foreign policy? Because, you're a governor of Alaska. What kind of experience do you have with foreign policy? And her response was, well, our nearest neighbor is Russia. I have had contact with Russia about trade issues, about border issues. So she's like, Russia's just right around the corner. I've had contact with foreign policy with Russia for a long time. So, I've got that kind of experience. Tina Fey, when she made fun of this, because it was a comedy routine, nobody was expecting her to be serious, but when Tina Fey made fun of this and the same question was asked of Tina Fey playing the character of Sarah Palin, she said, I can see Russia from my house. So American people, they saw that clip of Tina Fey over and over and over again, and they actually believed that that's what Sarah Palin said, and it wasn't true. Okay. Now, there were other obstacles in John McCain's running for election. One thing, he was very old. He was 72 when he was running. He was very moderate in his political stance. He was actually more on the liberal side. I remember when he was running against Barack Obama and listening to the two of them trying to debate each other, but they were so similar. And I was constantly saying those two could be each other's running mates. There's no difference between those two people, really. And also because the press was constantly after his running mate, his vice presidential candidate, there was a diminishment of the policy or of the popularity of the Republican Party. People had 8 years of Bush, and they were ready for a change. And we can, in classes, I will actually chart that. People will go from conservative to liberal with our voting. And if you wanted to do that with your parents as a project, go for it. Just get a piece of paper out and go backwards in time. Right now, we have a conservative president. So you can either make him like the bottom dot or the top dot, whichever way you want to do it. And you can just go back to all the different presidents and discuss who was liberal, who was conservative, and you'll see that there is this big up and down kind of thing. I'm going to do this really quick. I'll give you a little bit of an example. So, sorry, this is my grandkids coloring, but let's see where, okay. Let's say we're right here. This is B. Let's say this is Trump, okay? And he's a C. Okay, so we'll make him at the bottom, okay? And then before him, we had Obama. Before him, we had who? Who is just before Obama? It was Bush, conservative. Just before Bush, we had Clinton. Just before Clinton, we had, who did we have? Oh, we had Bush, the older one. And then just before that, we had Reagan. And Reagan was actually around for a good long time. And then just before Reagan, we had Carter. You can trace this back through history and do this. It's just a really simple way to see how people fluctuate in their beliefs and what they want. Usually it's people just get tired of either being successful or, not so successful, and they figure a change is in order. And so they'll make a change and they'll go the opposite way of the path that we're on right now. And you can actually do that same thing in all kinds of issues when it comes to art, sciences, the political deviation there between conservative and liberal. Okay, so President Barack Obama, he easily won the presidency in 2008. He was new. He was a black man, and everybody was very excited about having our first black candidate who was a very serious candidate. Before this, we did have a black candidate from the Communist Party back in the 30s and 40s. I think it was the 40s. But he really wasn't going to make, people weren't going to vote for him because of his politics. Even Americans who did not agree with his proposed policies, and I was one of those Americans who didn't agree with his policies, but I also didn't agree with McCain's. His policies on things like abortion, because his abortion stance was all abortion is okay up to the point of birth. It's fine with him. Same-sex marriage, he was a big proponent of that. But yet, and I'm speaking for myself as well, we were excited about having a black president for the first time because it felt like we were finally moving forward away from racism. We were in what we called the post-racist America, and we were excited about that. We wanted to see him succeed. We wanted Barack Obama to succeed, even though we didn't agree with a lot of his policies. Unfortunately, a lot of his policies really hurt the United States. Okay, we are going to stop right there. I know that this is going to be split into two parts because I had to get up halfway through, but go ahead and make sure that you get your homework done a little bit at a time. I really want you to get that all done because I'm hoping we can finish this tomorrow. That would be amazing. And then you could just turn your book in when you're done. Okay, so get to work and I'll talk to you tomorrow. Bye.